never had help, now waiting on a deal on my own time, on my own grind. You know we ain't never gonna quit. Take my heart, baby girl, let's go. You know life's too short. Don't you miss the boat.
What is permaculture?
Permaculture is actually, and then another way nature gives us that atmospheric nitrogen into our food and into our soils is through.
Over the last couple of years, trying to tell as many farmers as possible that if they have.
We're at a point now where we know we can't keep going on with this.
This is full circle for me. I'm getting chills just starting to really connect these dots.
Welcome to the Grow Moringa podcast. Today, we have the honor of hosting a remarkable guest, a true guardian of the earth, and a seasoned artist who has woven her life into the tapestry of a sustainable living community. Moti is not just an artist. She's a globetrotter who embarked on a journey to learn from the very heartbeat of nature. Her adventures took her across the world, immersing herself in the wisdom of permaculture, soil sciences, microorganisms, and the intricate dance of regenerative farming. After years of dedicated exploration, living and working in farms, retreat centers, and eco-villages worldwide, Moti now calls Sebastian, Florida, her home. Here, she serves as the Director of Regenerative Agriculture for ChoZen Retreat Center, a 40-acre sanctuary that envisions itself as the camp for the humanity of the future. Get ready to be inspired as Moti paints a picture of how soil is the root of all living organisms. She shares her depth of knowledge, the tumultuous history of chemical and synthetic fertilizers, offering insights into the practical solutions we can all implement and achieve today. She's already had a profound impact on bettering our planet. Watch and listen as we delve into her incredible journey and the transformative power of regenerative practices. Let's explore the wisdom she brings from the fields to our podcast studio. Thanks for watching.
You have a beautiful story. I love that we're finally getting connected once again after these last couple of years of just being in each other's, periphery. And you just made it to Florida. Yes,
a couple years ago, after I contacted you in Hawaii.
Wow.
I ended up getting, a call, a pull here to Florida, which is new for me. But the reason I was definitely comfortable with it is because we're here still in the tropic zone.
Yes.
And the tropics is what I've come from, tropical permaculture.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I like tropical permaculture too.
Yeah. I don't do well in the cold.
I don't do well in the cold. And I think just the dormancy of it, I really like being able to grow all year.
Yes.
It's really something special.
Prolific, abundant. Yeah. So that's why I was super open to coming here and working in Florida. And also, Florida, there was a lot that I was seeing happening, including you. A lot of people here having a presence in permaculture and regeneration.
Mm-hmm. So
yeah, that's kind of got brought to Florida.
Wonderful. And I love the Sebastian area, Sebastian Inlet.
This is all new for me here in Sebastian, but the reason I really love it here is it really reminds me of Hawaii with that slower, laid back. It's not like you're driving down the road and people aren't trying to run you off the road. It's very relaxed. You can go to the store and just park. And that to me just is keeping a little bit of that aloha vibe here. Yeah. So I love it here in Sebastian.
I love it too. I was able to visit that location that you're working now a couple of years ago.
Yep.
It was the host of the permaculture convergence for a few years. And I really love that it was taken over by Tony and now it's named ChoZen. I love the new name and everything.
Yes.
It's a beautiful place. How did you end up hearing first about ChoZen?
Yes. So when I got here to Florida, I ended up working for Hippocrates Health Institute, known as Hippocrates Wellness now. And Hippocrates has a deep history coming from Anne Wigmore. And Anne Wigmore is who brought us in the 30s and the 40s. She's who brought us living raw foods, sprouts, wheatgrass, all of those things. She was a worm composter.
Wow.
And so in West Palm Beach is Hippocrates Wellness. And Tony Cho and Jimena Cho ended up coming to Hippocrates for their services and retreat, and ended up hearing some of my lectures there. I was lecturing about sprouts and composting and garden classes. And so that's how we ended up ultimately connecting and hearing about Tony's new project, which is ChoZen, which is where
beautiful.
I am now.
And how much acreage do you guys have there?
It's around 40 now.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is a fairly newer project, the ChoZen project, because of the extra acres we got and the initiatives he's doing. So it's just about 5-6 months old. So we're really at the beginning of it.
Awesome.
And Tony and Jimena Cho are the founders, and they really back regeneration. They're really backing and supporting and putting it into action, what we need to do. You know, that ChoZen is a camp for the humanity of the future.
Yeah.
And our mission statement is nature is medicine, food is medicine, and community is medicine. So through that, nature, food, and community, and us gathering, you know, going towards regeneration and bringing me on the team with everything I do. Just so grateful for Tony and Jimena Cho for really putting this initiatives into these projects, because they're not easy.
No.
These are not easy things we're doing, changing paradigms.
Yep.
And so, yeah, that's basically how I ended up at ChoZen.
Wow. What's your position there?
So it's the director of regenerative ag and education.
Wonderful.
And specifically, you know, my background is with permaculture and soil. So really bringing in that regenerative soil awareness and education through that.
Yeah. You really said something profound the other day, was how regeneration, the term regeneration is really like beyond organic.
Definitely.
And a couple of years ago, that was a term that I was hearing the buzz about. And it's even now, regenerative is kind of that buzzword in our community for soil builders, farmers, permaculturalists.
Permaculture is regenerative. So for us permaculturists, that's been in this for a while, we just can slide right into this area because it is a regenerative practice. And a lot of the regenerative agriculturists, regenerative farming, and the regenerative farming movement, you will hear them speak all about the principles of permaculture and understanding biomimicry. But they won't necessarily say permaculture, but as a permaculturist, and if you know permaculture, that's the language they're speaking, but it's under the term regenerative agriculture.
Oh, I love that.
Hey, thanks a lot for watching this episode of the Grow Moringa podcast. In case you haven't yet tried the contents inside the Biobox, you are not fully reaching the yields and the potentials that your plants could grow. Whether you're growing indoor, outdoor, fruit, veggie, herb, ground cover, whatever it is, you need to be using the contents of the Biobox, because it's going to help increase the yields of all fruits, veggies, even help you with your grass. That's right. You can put this on your landscape as well. This is living microorganisms, protein, enzymes, vitamins, and minerals, all made from moringa leaves. And it's a USDA certified organic biofertilizer. And you can get it from me here using the link below. Please continue watching the episode of the Grow Moringa podcast with Moti and enjoy.
Yeah.
What is permaculture?
Permaculture is actually a holistic design system.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people think permaculture is just growing food, right? Or agriculture, and it's not. It's so much more. And what it is a holistic design system that follows a list of ethics and principles that we follow. And if we follow those ethics and principles, it can guide us to design everything especially energy flows and ecological landscapes, it can guide us to give us that paradigm shift that we need to understand the connectiveness and the holistic design of nature. So permaculture as a holistic design system literally is using observation, which is principle number one. We're using observation to mimic nature. So we aim to understand nature's design and what it's doing. And we aim to take that observation and translate that into design, literal biomimicry. And from there, we have different designs for all different reasons, where regenerative farming, that's growing food. That's literally growing food. So it's very important to note that permaculture is a design system, and regenerative ag is growing food specifically, and permaculture is regenerative.
I love that. You said that so eloquently.
Thank you. Thank you.
When did you first hear about permaculture?
Yeah. So before this path, I was an artist, born an artist, family of artists, pursuing art full time. And back then it was the gallery scene. It wasn't like it is now with social media. Mm-hmm. It really was hitting up the galleries. And so back then in, Los Angeles, I was dipping into permaculture back then. There was workshops, there was things I was doing, but I was an artist. I was full-time art. And what ended up happening is I ended up living in a community in Los Angeles with 2 really big houses, an acre of land on a slope there just east of downtown. And it was an artist collective, an artist community. Everyone there was either a musician or an artist. We were all in LA trying to hustle our way into our arts. And it turned out after the crash of 2008, the owner was actually doing really well with his photography business and was moving on and was selling the property. Now, this is 2010 now. So prices had crashed. And with an investor, I got an opportunity to buy the property. We were about to get kicked out. And long story short, ended up with an investor that I had the opportunity to buy the property. And it was at that point, after I got approved to buy the property, which was very hard back in 2010, by the way.
Yes.
My whole life switched overnight from art to permaculture.
Wow.
Art as in visual gallery art into permaculture, which is still art.
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely.
So I'm still an artist,
Yes.
but I'm in a more in designing systems.
I can see your canvas right there next to you. You got a beautiful microscope.
Oh,
That's
exactly.
That's where you're doing your art.
Exactly.
Right now.
And yeah, that, and also like working with gardens and creating soil, and all of it to me is super artistic. So even though I'm not doing the visual art anymore for galleries and things like that, I don't feel any different as being an artist.
Same. Yeah. Just being, having gone through architecture school, people always ask me all the time, like, hey, aren't you doing architecture? Or like, why aren't you doing architecture? And I say, well, I'm building a community. Yeah. And architects might not necessarily just build physical buildings, but they build the concept that strings the people together in space to that, say, physical place. And that's what I'm doing, is I'm creating a platform where we all gather in space. And then we also have local meetups, and we're possibly purchasing real estate and buildings and things like that. So it's developing into one day being able to practice at a more physical level. But right now I'm learning how to build community and communicate these strategies for building community in this way.
It's all new what we're doing.
Yeah.
It's all new. Yeah. And in 2006 in LA, at that community and in my life, I was getting very much into homesteading and Sandra Katz's book of fermentation, I got really into. So I started doing a lot of things as an artist living in that community. I started really getting into a lot of that in fermentation. And I also, through different subcultures, came through to a scientist that was an R&D scientist and researcher for a product called EM, which is efficient microorganisms, sometimes referred to as effective microorganisms.
Wow.
So back in 2006, I got very heavily into fermentation and that product EM, using it, understanding it. And what EM is and fermentation is working with microorganisms. And what we're doing is we're working with facultative anaerobe microorganisms, which is the majority of our microorganisms in nature.
Really?
They're in everything. And so what facultative anaerobic microorganisms are is they're microorganisms that can work both in aerobic and anaerobic environments. They can work in both. In fact, certain anaerobic, like maybe the bacillus, actually certain ones can use oxygen. So they're not just anaerobic. They can utilize oxygen. So they're facultative anaerobes. So if we're mimicking nature and we're understanding nature and we're understanding fermentation, which has been around for so long. So and we use common sense. It's facultative anaerobes running this world.
Wow. So when you are fermenting things, did you start with like food?
Yes. So with Sanders Katz's book, which a lot of fermenters are aware of, he really brought a lot of this information to us. We're doing sauerkraut. We're doing kombucha. Kefir.
Yes.
Yeah. I took some classes back then because there was a scene in LA back then for this, with the raw milk and making raw milk kefirs. And so, yeah, I really got at making root beer from the roots, which is the best thing I've ever drank in my life.
Wow.
With the fermentation. So really starting back then to understand about microorganisms.
That's beautiful because, like you said, homesteading, canning, preserving, these are things that I'm really interested in now that I do have a field and a farm.
Yeah.
And I don't want to freeze everything because electricity sometimes goes out here. And I want to be able to have more resiliency with, say, canned goods. So I'm really interested in learning more about the efficient microorganisms.
Yep. EM. Yes.
And that's really kind of what you began studying, going from a food, then realizing that was something in our soil.
That, and I was consuming with a scientist, I was consuming it, brushing my teeth with it, bathing with it, because he researched it and makes his own. So really immersing myself into EM and smelling it everywhere.
Really? So what is it? It's a liquid?
It's a consortium of microorganisms working together, facultative anaerobes, that we then can use and has been used for a long time now, cleaning up waterways, using it for our health, using it in soil, using it in composting, cleaning with it. Honestly, there's really nothing you can't do with it because it's these beneficial microorganisms in a group together that really are beneficial to everything in our ecosystem.
How do you get it? Like, how do you get these? Or is it something that is a culture that you end up keeping alive, kind of like a sourdough?
Yes. So there's a couple things. You can make your own, which I do. And you can also buy it, which I have. And then once you buy it, you can extend it, adding some more sugar, adding an airlock and extending it to keep it going. And you can also make it yourself. So the base of the EM is lactobacillus. So there's a very easy recipe for lactobacillus and coming from Korean natural farming, which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
Purple non-sulfur bacteria. Purple non-sulfur bacteria is also in it. Saccharomyces cerevisiae is in it, which is your yeast. So capturing yeast is also really prevalent. So, when back in the day when they were making their breads and beers and fermenting, they were capturing that yeast that's already
in the atmosphere around. Or say, okay.
Yeah. The Saccharomyces cerevisiae is bread yeast. You can go buy it right now.
Wow.
Add that as a biofertilizer. And so you amazing. Can buy EM, and there's EM1 and EM Pro, and there's different levels, and they sell some for consumption and some for not. When I was working with this scientist, you know, we were drinking all different types and using all different types. And so you can check
energizing? Out. Does it give you energy?
Not so much energizing as it is just going to that holistic microbial, biological base of our reality, right?
Yeah.
Because what we do is we strip that out with our lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
So by us cultivating these things, including fermentation, as we need to keep fermenting and making that part of our lifestyle every day continuously, because of our lifestyles now that are continuously destroying the microbes. So we're really talking about microbiomes at this point.
That's like the immune system, like the building.
Yeah, we're talking about our gut, system, which controls our brain. We're talking about all of the microbiomes. When we're talking about the microbiomes of the soil, we're talking about all the microbiomes together, which is called a hologonot. And at the base of that is microorganisms, beneficial ones that we can cultivate.
At the pyramid, like a soil pyramid, all of it is kind of like all of these microorganisms that you're talking about that really make up our soil.
Yes. And so these microorganisms are the chemists. They're the chemists. They're the ones doing the work.
Yep.
So we need other things in there. We need minerals. We need the chemistry. We need all that. But the microorganisms are the chemists that can extract those minerals and do the work and convert it. And actually that, if we mimic nature as nature is designed to do, and we go that way with our health, we're reaching those higher pinnacles of health, which can only be reached through biology, those higher tiers. So when we take away these microorganisms in our food growing systems and in our own health, we are not able to get to those higher levels of expression genetically.
Well, that makes me wonder, why is our food being grown the way that it is, and it doesn't have these strengthening, regenerative connections in the soil? Like, why are we practicing essentially against nature?
Money
and
power.
Because I know, like in the early 1900s, we didn't really have synthetic fertilizers. It was much more organic.
So with our history with that, even though it was organic, we've always exploited the earth. We've exploited our resources. We've used up the soil. We haven't understand our connection with the soil. So even though we made, before synthetic fertilizer production, even though you can say, oh, we were organic and regenerative ag, I've heard regenerative ag is just going back to the way we used to do it. I respectfully argue, no, it's not. Yes, we're getting away from those chemical fertilizers, but we never had this connection to nature of understanding that we are nature, and setting up our systems and designs and our lifestyle reflecting that paradigm shift that we are nature. So I believe, except for a few, of course, there was always the selective few who understand this ecological mind. But this was not a majority of our culture or society. We have not. And so our history actually will show us that it was formed off of just taking, exploiting, finding natural resources, and taking it all, not understanding the connectiveness and how to do it sustainable, let alone regenerative.
Right.
So even if we were using organic, it was still not regenerative, and it wasn't this holistic design of connection that at its core is that paradigm shift that we are nature.
And it really took a shift in the early 1900s.
Yes.
Because of politics, war, ammunition.
Yeah.
That's really the reason why we're in where we're in right now with our food system.
Yes. The quest for ammunition so that we could have the most ammunition so we could keep fighting with the ammunition. It's like this nonstop cycle.
Because there's a special chemical in ammunition
ammonia nitrate.
Ammonia nitrate. Yeah. And that essentially is the main ingredient in chemical synthetic fertilizers.
Yes, that's the chemical fertilizer. So if we go a little bit before that, because that starts in World War I, but if we go just a little bit, so if I talk briefly about the history of our fertilizers, and I will talk briefly because this history is so fascinating and so deep, and you can go so deep in it, and it really is fascinating. But if we take it briefly before World War I, we were fighting for fertilizer. We had battles and wars for fertilizer. And where this fertilizer was coming from was really off some islands off Peru was a big site. And that's where a lot of birds would gather and have parties, basically. Mm-hmm. So they all gathered there. There was a lot of fish in the ocean. Mm-hmm. So they would all meet there and they would eat a lot of fish and they would mate there. Thousands and thousands of birds. And so from that mecca of birds eating fish and partying together, mm-hmm. they deposited their bird poop, which we call guano. Mm-hmm. And so this guano is the ammonium nitrate. And ammonium nitrate in the bird poop, in the bird guano, is what makes gunpowder.
And they discovered that in the early...
Yes. Well, gunpowder, the discovery of that came from the Chinese way before.
Right. And were they using...
So we knew that for a while. And so when they were going to battles over this ammonium nitrate for gunpowder, yes, part of it was for fertilizer, for growing food. Yes. But it was really about getting ammunition, because whoever had the ammunition would be the ones to be able to fight more. So that was just one thing, these islands off of Peru. And so there's a deep history with that, really fascinating. And then we also had the Chiliche from Chile, which Chile has this area because of its weather and location. It was able to have what we call Chiliche, which is the sodium nitrate.
What's that?
And so that's a form of fixed nitrogen.
Fixed nitrogen. And they called it white gold. Oh, yeah.
And so there was, again, battles and wars in this area for that fixed nitrogen, the sodium nitrate. And that, again, was for ammunition as well.
That's capturing nitrogen from the atmosphere into a solid?
Well, that's actually deposits because of the conditions in that area. It was able to leave these deposits like limestone it's like a limestone with clay that created the sodium nitrate caliche.
In a natural form.
Yes. Fixed nitrogen in a natural form. Now we haven't gotten to atmospheric nitrogen yet. We will get there in a minute.
Right.
So this was another area that the world knew there was a source of the sodium nitrate, and there was wars over this to get. So before synthetic fertilizers, even if we were using organic, it still wasn't any mind frame or a paradigm of regeneration or organic or anything. It's just what we knew, right?
What did farmers use to amend their soil in the
manure, legumes, or these
nitrogen fixers,
bird guano? Yeah, they knew of this.
I know rabbit droppings are very popular. Was that something that they use? Rabbit droppings?
I'm not sure so much about that, but that's the things they knew of.
That's like I've heard that rabbit droppings are literally like a perfectly natural plant fertilizer. And you don't have to compost it or break it down. It's already in a safe enough form that you can just go straight as a dropping onto the plants.
Yeah, especially because they're eating all plants.
That's great too.
Yeah, so them eating plants makes it a different consistency, right? So those wars and those battles over that organic nitrogen, actually, the Chilean dirt, the silice, led us into World War I. Wow. That led us into it. And so what happened was, I have it 1898. A man named Sir William Crookes, who was the president of the British Association of Advanced Sciences, set out an alarm, a message to the world back then. And the message, the warning was, we are going to run out of our nitrogen source, what we just talked about. We're going to run out of it in about 20, 30 years, and we're going to have mass deaths. We're all going to die. We're going to run out of food. We're going to run out of food. It's all going to be over. And this is where we're headed. Again, that mentality of like, let's take what we can from the earth and then like not seeing it as sustainable or regenerative, right?
Yeah, so that's propaganda, fear tactics.
Yeah,
a little bit of warmongering, kind of trying to stir things up. And,
And
in the
when
late 1800s.
Yeah. And when he set this message out, now we send out a message. It's like that. It really did travel around the world. It was in newspapers. It really was a message that got broadcasted around the world back then. And so as he set out this message of where we were headed, he also provided a solution.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah.
And he called out to our world chemist. Chemist.
What was he?
He was the president of the British Association of Advanced Sciences.
Okay, but he wasn't necessarily a scientist, but he was a leader in the field. So he may have ran a laboratory or things like that. And so when he set out the solution with the message of doom and death, it was in the field of chemistry. Okay.
So our world's chemists then all took it seriously. And they're like, we have to figure out how to get nitrogen. So if I back up a minute here, we're going to talk about atmospheric nitrogen.
Okay. So he put out a call. He said, hey, everybody, we have this problem.
We're running out of bird poop.
We're running out of bird guano and nitrogen. So it's mostly just
we're running out of resources.
We're running out of resources. We may run out of food if we don't fix this problem. So here's a call out to all the chemists. Help us find this solution.
Yes. And so they understood that 78% of our atmosphere is nitrogen. So it wasn't that nitrogen is rare or we don't have a lot of it. In fact, it's the most abundant. It was that it's really hard to get this atmospheric nitrogen in a form that we can use, a soluble form. That was the mystery. And he believed through chemistry, we could do this. Now, nature does this in two ways that we know of. One, it's through lightning. So when lightning strikes, there's enough energy to break that atmospheric nitrogen bond. So when we're talking about atmospheric nitrogen, we're talking about dinitrogen, which is N2. And it has a super, super, super strong bond. And lightning can break that bond. And then what happens is that turns into a nitrate that then gets collected through the rain. And then it comes down to our ecosystems, into our soils, into our plants through the rain. So when you have a rainstorm, lightning and thunder, and the next day, people notice like, wow, it's really green.
Yes.
It literally is being fed nitrogen.
I love seeing that and knowing like, that's why we get so excited for rain and rainwater, because it's living water and it's like fertilizer. I feel like
it is. It's the atmospheric nitrogen, dinitrogen, N2, turning into the available form through the lightning, breaking that bond. And it literally is feeding nitrogen to our ecosystem. And that's why it looks greener.
Wow. And that's also one reason why Florida is so amazing in growing food, because we get some of the most severe thunderstorms and lightning storms than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah. So it's nitrogen oxide. It's creating the nitrate. So that's through lightning. And then another way nature gives us that atmospheric nitrogen into our food and into our soils is through bacteria. And bacteria does nitrogen fixation into ammonia. So bacteria is able to also have that force and capability through nature to break that bond. And then it turns it into ammonia for our plants. And then recently through James White, we now understand that through rhizophagy, that nitrogen, those microorganisms go inside the plant eats the microorganisms, and then through the nitrous oxide the plant releasing nitrous oxide inside the plant, that bacteria will release that ammonia into the plant.
Beautiful.
So, which is what we know now, just recently.
Wow.
And so that's how bacteria do it. But back then in 1898, when Sir William Crook put out this call, it was, he thought there has to be a chemistry solution to get this atmospheric into a form we can use. And yes, it was to grow food.
Right.
But it really was for ammunition.
Right.
It really was for ammunition.
Totally. Because even though, because the microorganisms, they're already doing that naturally. They're sequestering and absorbing the nitrogen from the atmosphere. They're fixing it.
Yes.
And they're putting that into the plant.
Through rhizophagy that we now know. Yep. Yeah. So we know that now. Yeah.
And so what happened with the experiment? Who won? Like who came?
Okay. So that's a deep, fun story that I won't go in a lot of detail with, but just to tell you a little bit about it. There was a lot of scientists who tried. It was a really, really hard thing to do. And they didn't think, after years and years and years after the call went out, they didn't think they can do it. And a couple scientists came forward and was like, it can't be done. We can't do it. And it was because of competition and maybe, ego, and maybe like trying to prove. A couple scientists went up against each other to prove that their data, they both agreed that it wouldn't work, but they didn't agree on why it didn't work. So one scientist wanted to go deeper to explain why his reason it didn't work was better than the other scientist's reasons that didn't work. And who this scientist is Fritz Haber. And Fritz Haber, by trying to prove that his other scientist peers, that their reasoning it didn't work was wrong, by him going farther to explain that his reason of why it can't work is right, he actually figured it out.
Wow. That's
so it was
crazy.
Driven a lot by that, because they thought this can't happen. It can't work. So through this is something that took many years. This was something, this was a long story. This was a big thing. And ultimately, Fritz Haber figured it out through a combination of the right temperature, the right pressure, and the right catalyst. He figured out how to do it on a small scale, where it was dripping out, taking atmospheric nitrogen and dripping out drip by drip, very, very slow, but it was producing drops of this liquid soluble ammonia.
Wow.
So ammonia nitrate, ammonia nitrate is what we need for ammunition.
Okay, so the whole point of this is to get the ammonia nitrate.
Yeah, he was from Germany, and he was a German patriot. And back then, for him, it was really about proving how dedicated you are to your country in bringing your country forward with your contribution. So he was purely driven to show what a patriot he was and prove this to Germany, which we'll get more into in a minute, that story.
What year was his discovery?
Okay, so that happened about 05-ish. But what happened is his discovery, it needed someone else. It needed more to be able to scale it up. to a bigger size and produce it to what we do now today. So it was the combination of Fritz Haber with a man named Carl Bosch.
Oh,
And
we know Bosch.
Yeah, Carl Bosch.
Is that the Bosch?
I don't know.
Like the German Bosch, like the company, German company?
Maybe. I'd have to look in.
Was he also German?
Yeah, so he worked for a company called BASF. And this was a big German chemical company during the time. And so Fritz Haber was shopping around his discovery, making bread from air, right?
Because the
growing food with nitrogen. So this was a huge deal.
Oh, wow.
They called it making bread from air, right? Or making gunpowder from air.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so long story short, BASF came in, and this was a chemical company in Germany that was known for taking risks and going big and taking risks. So they had done it before already. And Carl Bosch came in, and he threw a few stories as well. He basically, which was also a huge undertaking and took many, many years up until 1914 to be able to basically make a huge machine that would scale up Haber's invention to what it is now, which is our nitrate ammonium factories. That's making our ammonium. Those factories are just huge machines.
Oh, yeah.
That Bosch figured out how to do. So it was both of them coming together that created it.
Going into World War I too.
Yes. So what happened was this was going into World War I, and Germany had 6 months left of ammunition before this was finalized through Bosch. Because of, and this is called the Haber-Bosch process, Fritz Haber, Carl Bosch, because of this process and completing it, 1913, 1914, they estimate that it gave Germany 2 more years of fighting power because they now had this huge machine making the ammonium nitrate, which no one else had. And they were already being cut off with their supply chain from the Allies. So their supply of the nitrate was already being cut off for ammunition from the Allies. So they when they figured this out, they didn't need the supply chain. They didn't need it all. They were making their own ammunition, which in World War I brought them 2 years longer is what they estimate of fighting power.
So they were able to keep that going. And then,
this was huge. This was absolutely huge. And the BASF was the only company that had this capability at that time.
Wow.
In World War I. So then Fritz Haber went on from inventing that, and he again really trying to prove what a patriot he was to Germany. He kept going to show that he was a scientist for his country. And he is known as the grandfather of chemical warfare because he then went on to create chlorine gas.
Oh my goodness.
Which was the first time really of successfully creating chemical warfare.
Jeez.
And so Fritz Haber actually is super controversial back then. And he was labeled a war criminal for this. Interesting also, his wife, Clara, she was the first woman to get her PhD in chemistry. She also was very passionate about chemistry. And when she understood what Fritz was doing with chemistry, it just ruined it was a perversion of science is what they called it. A perversion of chemistry. Using chemistry, a perversion of it. So it was very controversial what he did. And when he received his Nobel Prize for this, it was very controversial, even where, some people wouldn't accept it with him and, really considered him a war criminal. And it's interesting that I had read somewhere that he had justified the chemical warfare, saying, if I invent chemical warfare, it will actually end the war faster, therefore saving more lives than if I don't. So that was his way of thinking, like, well, actually, if I create this really horrendous chemical, then it will just end the war and we can just be done with the killing. So obviously, a lot of people didn't agree.
No, and this is now going into the tail end of World War I by the
I don't have the exact date for that one,
almost
but yeah,
like the early like mid teens and 20s. 19.
Yeah, going into World War II. I don't have that exact date. We have to look it up. Yeah. And then Carl Bosch, after scaling up the machine, the factory, he went on, because of what he did, he was given the CEO of BASF, the company. He ended up getting all the German chemical companies united as one big chemical company cartel.
Oh, wow.
A huge chemical empire. And from there, he really moved on to work with synthetic oil and gas, because he knew eventually that their way of doing the Haber-Bosch process would get figured out, which was very hard for people to figure out. It took many, many years, but he knew eventually that people would catch on and there'd be more. It actually ended up getting leaked through inside people that ended up releasing the information, because it was really hard for people. Inspectors would come in to try to no one could figure it out. So eventually insiders released the information. So he knew that was headed. So he took BAS and basically he created this huge chemical company complex that ended up being called Luna. And Luna was the size of a city. It employed 50,000 people. And it ended up being the main target area of World War II, ran through Hitler. And all the Allies knew that if they bombed Luna, if they took out Luna, they could take out the whole German side of the war, because it was all being ran through the production of the ammonia, and the production of the synthetic gas was their main component of the war. So that Luna ended up being the main target for the war, which, by the way, I didn't mention, the Haber-Bosch process ended up being termed the heart of the German war machine.
That's the nickname of it.
That's what they called it. The Haber-Bosch is the heart of the German war machine.
Jeez.
This is
crazy.
I know, it's really fascinating. I'm giving you a really short version of it too. And when Fritz Haber continued on after creating the chlorine gas, after they call him the most influential and tragic scientist of our time, when you really get into this history and story. And what happened was, after their first successful use of the chemical gas, where they were successful, they ended up having a party and celebrating. And that night, his wife went into the garden and killed herself.
What?
From it. Yep. And what's so fascinating about this story, one part, is that Fritz Haber is Jewish. And his chemical gases and everything he was creating later, from his institute that he was given with the money, the power to create these things after he did his the ammonia process, actually went on to end up being the gas for the gas chambers for Hitler. He was already dead at that point, but it was his original formulas that they tweaked, took out the smell, and that ended up being the gas in the gas chambers, which killed some of his family.
Exactly. That's
and so that's why they call it like one of the most tragic scientists of all time.
How unfortunate.
So this is a deep, deep history that, if we really have to understand that, that's how we're growing our food today.
Really? So this is why it's all tying into the fertilizer companies today, essentially. Now
using Haber-Bosch.
We're at World War II. We're coming in out of World War II. Now
Yes.
we have excess of
Exactly.
this.
So then they stopped using it for war once the war was over. And that's when they like, all right, we'll use it to grow food now. And that was actually the beginning of privatization of synthetic chemical fertilizers that got manufactured, which was led by the Rockefellers and Ford.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Full
and so
circle.
that combined with some technology, irrigation, some seed breeding, brought us into the Green Revolution.
In the 50s.
Yeah, it would be like 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And it's called the Green Revolution. And it's a few things combined, but really, really led by our chemical fertilizers. And what this did is gave us a boom in population. So they really credit Fritz Haber as saving billions of lives or being responsible for billions of lives because of that population boom was because of chemical fertilizer, nitrogen. And so when I research a lot, I'm always hearing like he created death and life, right? He created the ammunition and all that part, but he also created life with growing food. And this is where I want to say, we're looking at it now. It's not death and life, it's death and death. Because we're at a point now understanding, and it's only been 100 years or so, that this nitrogen isn't really life. It's destroying everything. And we'll talk about that soon here. But to say that it brought life, we're understanding now how much destruction to our Earth's health and our health that it caused. So can you really say that?
Yeah.
And what they're saying is, it gave us a way of producing more food to support more populations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we look at our food today, how much we produce and how much we waste.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone's aware of every supermarket, every restaurant just throwing dumpsters of food away. And the food we're getting is so processed and like making us sick.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what is giving us life, is this excess of like really unhealthy food that we like to throw away anyway. And I'm saying throwing away is not a closed loop. I'm saying throwing in a dumpster in a landfill, creating methane, not actually taking what we aren't using and cycling it back through composting and putting it back into the earth.
Right.
So when you really look at this perspective of like, oh, this is a big thing of like, well, he did so much wrong, but he did so much good. It was evil and life. And it's like, well, let's look at this synthetic nitrogen and really let's get real about, is it life? Because again, we'll talk about it right now of what it's doing to our planet. But we're at a point now where we know we can't keep going on with this. And so this is how we're growing our food today. And I think that's why this history is so fascinating, because sometimes when we hear about history and it's so outrageous, like we really did that?
Yeah.
We really thought that way, but we can always do it like, well, we don't do that now. We know better now. Like, no, this is how we're growing food right now. This is literally how we're living. And that's why I feel like this history and this understanding is so important, because it's not a history of how things used to be. It's a history of how we are where we are now and how we got to where we are.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what can we do to really maybe make a bigger impact on healing our planet?
Sure. And right before we get there, I really want to finish the history part. I have some notes here to really understand what this ammonium nitrate and production through the Haber Bosch is doing.
Great.
And so
Wonderful.
We'll review that really quick, and then we'll talk about our solutions. Okay, so I just wanted to quickly give the viewers an understanding of really what's happening when we're using chemical synthetic fertilizers with the Haber Bosch process. And we're really focusing on nitrogen right now. There's others, but we're just really talking about nitrogen right now.
Yeah.
And the Haber Bosch. And so just to run the Haber-Bosch process with these big ammonium factories, these big ammonium machines, it takes a large amount of resources to do this.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot of natural gas, it takes a lot of water, and it takes a lot of fossil fuels to run these machines. Mm-hmm. So it's not like the nitrogen is using petroleum. It takes a lot of petroleum and resources, natural resources, just to run that machine of the Haber-Bosch plants.
Right.
And all of that and how we're processing, transporting and everything. It's very intense, excessive resources. And on top of that, our conventional agriculture system is subsidized $400 billion annually. So that's $1 billion a day. So not only is it not like it takes so much to make it, but we're having to throw money at our agriculture systems on top of it. But that's not it. You would think, well, okay, maybe it costs a lot to make and we're using a lot of natural resources to make it, but maybe the output is really great and it's worth it, right?
Right.
Let's pay a lot for something really good. No. The output is actually a bit more traumatizing. So I'll review the output of using synthetic chemical fertilizers in our agriculture systems. So one, it produces 5% of the greenhouse gas emissions, 2% of the carbon dioxide emissions of using chemical fertilizers. But this is the great part. When we apply synthetic fertilizers to our food growing systems, 90% of it runs off.
What?
It's not even going into the plant. 90%, because it's not natural. 90% is running off, and it's running off into our watersheds, our rivers, our oceans. It's creating our algae blooms and dead zones.
Exactly.
And it's estimated that 65% of our estuaries and coastal waters in the US are dead because of the synthetic chemical fertilizer.
And that's from runoff, and even the plants themselves, they accumulate a lot of water, wastewater. And that is also sometimes leaching and being dumped into the environment.
Yes. But there's more. Wait, there's more. So on top of that, it sinks into the groundwater instead of in the plant, and it's destroying our drinking water, and it's creating birth defects from the water and diminishing soil quality, GMO and pesticide with glyphosate. And then what happens is when we're applying this nitrogen onto the plant, a lot of it also, not only is it running off into our water, causing so much destruction, it's also gassing off as well, which produces nitrous oxide gases, which is 300 times more warming potential than CO2.
This is unbelievable.
I know. And then on top of that, it's causing the way we farm and using these chemical fertilizers is causing desertification and the soil water destruction, which is a whole lecture in itself of desertification, causing extreme weather patterns and basically destroying our whole holistic ecosystem functioning of cycles.
Yeah, because when we farm, the soil is completely getting degraded. Then we end up having to leave that place after a few years and go to another place.
Yeah, that's what we've done historically, and just how we expanded our society is that way. We just used and moved on, exploited and moved on. That's how the West moved from America. That's how we moved out around the world.
Wow.
Yeah. So now that brief overview of what does it take input to make this chemical fertilizer and what is it doing on the output. I just gave you a brief understanding. And that's where I say, is the Haber-Bosch process really giving life? It's destroying so much life.
I see that.
So it is ammunition and it is destruction with our food growing systems as well. It's not, he gave, so much life and also that. And I don't want to put it straight on Fritz Haber because I'm sure someone else would have figured it out as well.
Sure.
And I'll end this part of the history with one quote from him. So in 1918, he accepted the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. And I want to read this quote. He said, "It may be that this solution is not the final one." And so he even acknowledged and understood that this isn't the way.
Mm-mm.
This isn't going to solve what we need. So he said, it may be that this solution is not the final one. Nitrogen bacteria teaches us that nature, with her sophisticated forms of chemistry of living matter, still understands and utilizes methods that which we do not as of yet know how to imitate. So he was saying, we do not know how nature works. We do not know how to mimic nature. We are not doing biomimicry. And her sophisticated ways, we don't understand yet. And this isn't the final way. So even him that discovered this knew this is not it. This is not the way. We need to mimic nature. We just don't know how yet. And so that's where I believe we are now.
Oh, yeah.
And so sometimes I like to reflect on this story, and I like to think that what if in 1898, Sir William Crook didn't just limit his message that it's a chemistry solution, or alternatively, what if us as a humans were in a consciousness that we are entering now?
Yes.
Now, what if there's a different solution, a holistic solution that mimics nature? Well, we weren't there 100 and some years ago, but we are now. And so I really kind of like to play with like alternative timelines of like, what would it have been like if we had took a different kind of problem solving back then?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're there now. We're there now. And we do understand nature now more than ever through biomimicry. And it's really our consciousness and paradigm shift that's creating this.
Yep.
And so, yeah.
That's interesting.
Story.
I love this quote because he actually said in the quote, the solution, he said bacterial, something about bacteria.
Nitrogen bacteria teaches us that nature, with her sophisticated forms of chemistry of living matter. So
Nitrogen bacteria.
Exactly. So nature's form of sophisticated chemistry is bacteria are the chemist.
Right. And so that brings us to essentially now
Correct.
our present day solution,
Yeah.
which is what we're working on here together,
Correct.
is to talk more about and educate people about what is soil, how can people amend their soil without these toxic fertilizers,
Yeah.
and to somewhat boycott or just reduce the amount that's being used in a more natural way. And
Yeah. We've been
soil
doing
is
this
everything.
for such a short time, this synthetic fertilizers, 100 some years, and caused so much destruction. And we pretty much, I'm pretty sure everyone knows, even advocates of synthetic chemical fertilizers even know this. And I hear them talk about it. Oh, but it does pollute a lot. Oh, it does. We got to figure a different way out. I think we pretty much all collectively have run the course of this process and using these ways to grow our food. And ultimately what it's doing is destroying our Earth's health and our health, because when we're using these synthetic chemicals to grow our food, we're not reaching those higher levels of nutrition through microorganisms. So taking us back to the beginning of the conversation of it's through biological solutions, mimicking nature, that we're able to genetically express and reach these higher levels of health through our own microbiomes and our soil microbiome. And that is how it's done. So if we take away the biological solutions and the biology, the life, who are the chemists that can do it, we're growing food that is not medicine. We're growing food without nutrient density. We're growing food that does not have medicinal compounds through those secondary metabolites done through the microorganisms. So by us growing our food this way and thinking we're going to continue this way, not only is it destroying our ecosystem, which we just talked about, but that's the health issues as well. So they'll have graphs showing the population boom, the green revolution, and the correlation with our health issues. Food be thy medicine. if we're going to grow our food with chemicals, not utilizing biology, those plants aren't going to reach their genetic expression to give us those medicinal compounds and be our medicine. And that's why our food now doesn't have taste. It doesn't have color. It doesn't have smell. It's not how we remembered it used to be, because it doesn't have the biology to take it to those higher levels of nutrition, mimicking nature, bringing that food, that seed, that plant up to its full potential, giving us food be thy medicine.
Wow. I'm interested to see what some of these little microorganisms look like.
Yeah, and we can look at that now.
I would love to.
Yeah. So let me prepare a slide. And I had this ready to throw on there.
Beautiful.
And so,
yeah, let's throw a little bit of our biostimulant on there. We make that from moringa leaves. Now, do all plants essentially have like the ability to, like, they all have nitrogen?
Well, yeah, everything has nitrogen in our world.
Stored
inside. It's actually building blocks for RNA and DNA, essential for all life.
And then these microorganisms are also eating this nitrogen, storing it.
Yes. And then it can be released from these microorganisms in a couple ways. It can be trophic in the soil through other microorganisms that eat that bacteria, because the bacteria is a black box. The bacteria eats the nitrogen. It doesn't poop it out. It keeps it in its body.
Right. In the bodies.
Yeah. So it needs another organism to eat that. And that organism poops out the nitrogen.
Is that mycelium?
No. Well, mycelium is involved with this, but I'm specifically talking about bacteria right now.
Right.
And so when the other organisms, the protozoas, all the food web, the soil food web poops out the nitrogen, that's now in a soluble form for the plant to uptake. However, the primary pathway for plants to get nutrients is rhizophagy. And so, that is happening with the soil food web, but the primary way is what that we know now. We know this now is through rhizophagy. So the plant is eating these microorganisms. In fact, when the plant produces exudates, which is capturing the energy from the sun, the original energy, the energy that sets the whole system off, it captures that energy through its leaves, big solar panels, capturing as much energy as possible to start the whole chain off. It then produces sugars and hormones and what we call exudates, liquid carbon out into its roots. Well, it's sucking back 90% of those exudates back into itself. It's not just shooting out exudates, doing all this work to shoot out exudates and then just, that's it. They're shooting out and sucking back in 90%, which then they're eating microorganisms. So plants eat microorganisms. Plants aren't vegan. And then that's rhizophagy.
That's funny.
That's when nitrous oxide are hitting the microorganisms. They release the nitrogen. Some go past that process and don't get destroyed and absorbed in that process. And they actually get shoot back out through the root tips. And that's what actually causes roots to grow.
Wow.
Is rhizophagy. And then they'll cycle back again. So that's how nitrogen is getting obtained that way. So there's a couple pathways.
Wow, you say it so well. You explain it so well. I get a picture of it. You're like an artist where you're really like painting the picture.
And I'm giving you like the short version right now too.
Yeah.
Because each of these subjects can be like an hour lecture in themselves.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I'll get this slide prepared. And so when we're looking at biological solutions, just to go a bit back on my history and path, it was after I left the urban farm I was creating in Los Angeles. I actually went back to school for resource management, recycling, and zero waste too. In Santa Monica. It was a brand new program that got released. And that's when I obtained my first worms. They had a huge worm composting system that they took their food waste from the cafeteria, very huge. I got my free worms from them and partnered up with my local restaurant to obtain their food waste and capture their food waste, diverting it from the landfill. Because this is in 2012. I was very inspired to divert food from the landfill. So I really got into natural farming, composting, closed loop systems, setting up closed loop systems for communities, systems, and organizations. But I then got a chance to move on to Hawaii. And this was in 2013.
Yeah.
And so I got hired at a retreat center. And because of my background with community composting, setting up composting systems, being really into EM and all these things, they appointed me, doing that work for this retreat center. And my coworker handed me a photocopied book from Master Cho called Korean Natural Farming. And he's like, here, I have this photocopied book. I want you to go through it, decipher it, and implement it at the retreat center. So in 2013, by going through his book and going through each recipe. So in Korean natural farming, it's a form of natural farming where you're using different recipes of inputs for your farming. Mm-hmm. And as I was doing that for the retreat center, I also was documenting it online in a blog.
Oh, beautiful.
And back then, there was no social media. We were not that connected yet.
Yeah.
There was no putting posts out. If you had a blog, that was like a big deal. And I had a blog for my previous community. So I was like, let me do one for this. And I really wanted to document the information and get it out to the world for free. And I also wanted it documented so I could refer back to it when I was using this. So that's when I really got into natural farming in 2013, creating this blog, which I named Confessions from the Soil.
Oh, I love it.
Because back when I arrived in Hawaii, this whole new world opened up in permaculture and natural farming. And I felt like the soil was like telling secrets, like revealing secrets.
Big time.
Like everything was just coming up. And so I named it Confessions from the Soil. And it was just a way to document things and really open source. Back then, you could not really find any information online about Korean natural farming. And I think there was one person who I never saw them again. I think they were trying to monetize it in some way. It didn't work out.
Yeah.
But I was really in this belief that this should be open source. And this should be spread. So for me, just putting it up in this very primal, which I still have up today for archival purposes only, just this really rudimentary recipes with photos and instructions and recipes to do each input and put it out there. What happened is I ended up moving on after a few years in Hawaii. I did return to Hawaii and kept working, but I moved on to Thailand.
Wow.
To continue to study and work in permaculture. Back then, Thailand had a few projects going in intentional communities. So permaculture was happening out there. And so I went out there to work for a few permaculture communities. And it was in Thailand that I found out they had their own fermentation inputs as well. They weren't exactly the Korean natural farming, but they were doing the fermenting. And they were doing like similar recipes. And that's when I understood this is beyond Korean natural farming. Korean natural farming was discovered through methods from Japan. And then from the Master Cho from Korea, then expanded on that. But he learned from farmers, natural farmers in Japan, and then going to Thailand and seeing that they were doing it too. This is old. This is how we did things.
Yeah, this is the ancient knowledge of how it was actually really done.
And if we talk about fermentation and our food health too, they knew all that as well. So we're just going back into this knowledge that we've always been working with. And to me, it's a level of common sense. Mm-hmm. So when you say that it's anaerobic and it doesn't work because it's anaerobic, that doesn't make sense to me. That's not common sense. We're talking about fermentation, cultivation of microorganisms that is everywhere in us, the soil everywhere, facultative anaerobes that all ancient cultures have been practicing for a very long time.
Right.
And to me, that's common sense. So.
And that's unbelievable, because when you're saying input, this is something that you mean that we're bringing into the system. Right. So like Korean natural farming is harvesting.
Well, it's
bacteria.
Different recipes. It's a like series of different recipes, and they call them inputs.
And that's isolating essentially certain strains of bacterias and microbes. Cultivating that in a safe space. Wildcrafting, and then inputting that into a farming system to help amplify the nutritional value of the soil.
And understanding cycles, timing, connection. So it goes beyond just making your inputs and throwing it on your plants. It's really it's really a deeper understanding. It's a holistic, regenerative mindset of growing food. It's not conventional farming, but I'm throwing on organic inputs all in my plants, not understanding the connection, the timing, the cycles, just thinking like, let me dump this on. It's not that. It's even deeper than that, which I call regenerative. Sure. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So there's organic, where people are growing food conventionally and they're they might be using Korean natural farming inputs, or they might be using just organic inputs, but they don't have they're just throwing it on, not understanding that full connection of creating an ecosystem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a look at this ecosystem under the microscope.
Perfect. I'll load it up.
Awesome. And so when I first started getting into Moringa, of course, we all know about Moringa because it is highly effective for people. You know, people can consume it. I think that's what most people know it as. But it actually got its start in agriculture as a companion plant in fields and farming. And it helps other plants to grow well. It's not only a fast growing tree, but it also helps other plants to grow fast in the system. And it actually, a large portion of the industry has always used Moringa as an added plant in the system to increase production. And so it's actually been used as a plant food on a larger scale as an unknown kind of like secret hidden gem in natural farming.
Got it.
In regenerative farming. So today, Moringa is reaching upwards of over $20 billion worth of sales around the world. And this is between human consumption, animal consumption, and plant consumption. And I didn't even really get into animal and plant consumption until most recently over the last couple of years, because I first heard about Moringa about 10 years ago, and then started using it myself in teas and fasting with it and really supplementing it because of the high protein content. And protein is made up of amino acids, and amino acids are made up, are the building blocks of proteins. And Moringa is a complete form of protein. It has all 9 essential amino acids and all 9 non-essential amino acids for the body to make a complete protein. It's one of the reasons why it breaks down really fast, because it's such a high protein content plant. It breaks down super fast. So that's why we don't see it in the store, because it is so rich in these fast turning over enzymes, hormones. And so it breaks down and it goes bad fast. Well, that's the exact opposite of what the agriculture industry needs. They need very, almost high sugar, low mineral, low vitamin kind of
shipping it across the world.
Foods to ship across the world. Yeah. And that's why we're in this system where it's like our tomatoes don't taste or strawberries don't taste, the way that we really kind of when we see it, we have this idea of what it should taste like, but then when we get it, we're like, oh, this doesn't taste good.
Yeah.
So what we're doing here is beginning to educate everyone on the opportunities that Moringa has in industry, especially in the fertilizer industry, because of its high protein content, vitamin, mineral, and there's this hidden gem that's actually found in Moringa that all plants have, but it's found in very, very high amounts, and it's called zeatin. And this is a phytohormone. It's actually food for a very, very specific type of microorganism. I think they call it like a cytokine. It's called a cytokine. And these kind of organisms really love eating this zeatin. And zeatin is found in Moringa upwards of tens of thousands of times more than any other plant. It's one of the reasons why Moringa is the fastest growing tree in the world, is because it has a lot of this hormone zeatin in the leaves. So what we're doing is scientifically, we're getting Moringa under the microscope, and we're seeing just how powerful it is as a living bioactive fertilizer. And that's what we're doing here, is to see the microorganisms that are in the biostimulant, as well as some of the vitamins and minerals that Moringa in a liquid form can be used to at least help jumpstart and initiate and just really kind of get some of these systems in place for the soil to be more regenerative.
Yeah. So biological solutions like this is not only using the plant matter, but it's bringing in that biology. It's bringing in the microorganisms, it's bringing in the chemist.
Awesome. Let's see.
And so it's these chemists that are able to deliver everything you just talked about to our plants.
Beautiful.
So I'm going to switch over my camera view to my microscope.
Great. I'll put you on full screen.
So I'm zoomed out right now to 4x, but we're going to zoom closer in. But this is like a wide view of it, but let's go closer. So let me zoom in here. I'm now at a 40x objective. So we're 400 times in at this point. And now we're being able to see some of the microorganisms here. Wow. And so this is the biostimulant. This is one drop on a slide. And we're going to see a couple things. One, we see a lot of movement, right? Mm-hmm. Things are moving. That's biology. That's the life. Those are all different types of microorganisms. Some we can identify, like cocci, the bacillus, the long strands would be our bacillus. We have little cocci ones, which is like the little dots, and everything moving. That's the life.
Wow. I really see this. I can see the long strands. I can see the cockeyed ones. Yeah. Very, very clear.
I'll move a little bit to this here. And now we're starting to see like bigger chunks, right? Mm-hmm. That aren't moving. That's the Moringa.
Those are the physical,
the organic plant matter. Yeah. But this isn't any organic matter. This is Moringa, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to see.
We make it with fresh Moringa leaves, fresh green Moringa leaves, very young greens. The trees are harvested, and we're able to essentially extract the vitamins, the minerals, the nutrients, and we're able to bottle it and provide it as a bio fertilizer.
And so that organic matter is what we call it, that you're seeing, those bigger chunks that aren't moving. That is what the microorganisms are eating, and they're able to absorb all the macro and micro nutrients, all kinds of things, like all of it, they're able to capture into their bodies. And so that's, and the minerals that we'll probably see here soon. I can see a little now. And so that's what the biology is eating and bringing into their body. And then we talked about the different pathways that gets delivered to our plant.
Beautiful.
So I'll move around just a little and then stop again.
And this is 400 times zoomed in.
Yes. So there's like a little mineral right there going by. It's like a shiny diamond.
I see it.
Yeah, that's a mineral. And I can see other parts. If you look into the organic matter, you'll see other shiny, bright pieces.
Yep.
Those are going to be your minerals. So those are minerals coming from the Moringa that we just talked about, how powerful Moringa is. And how we get that to be a bioavailable form to our plants is through our chemists, our biology, our workers.
So they're eating it. So Moringa is a really good food source for these microorganisms.
Yeah, and the minerals.
The minerals that are found in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Moringa has, as many of people have heard, multiple times the amount of vitamins and minerals than other foods that we have. It's a super dark green, edible leaf that has a very thin cell wall that allows the vitamins and minerals to be accessed very easily without having to break it or cook it. It's very easily accessible because the leaves are very soft and thin and brittle. It's one of the reasons why it's not on the shelf as much, but it's also one of the reasons why it's used as plant food. So
yeah, this pretty much, the view right now is giving us a good variety of minerals and the organic matter and the biology, the bacillus, the cocci. And so these are facultative anaerobes. These are the microorganisms that are the majority of our nature. This is the microorganisms, the facultative anaerobes is what is in your compost.
And they can go between aerobic and anaerobic conditions.
Correct. Nature. It's nature. So, not to get too far into this, but if you keep talking about aerobic, nature's not aerobic.
Right.
Nature's not constantly turning the soil. Nature's not constantly bubbling into liquid.
I know what you're saying.
In fact, when you look, people think roots of a tree go really, really far down, like it reflects the top of the tree. That's incorrect. The roots are actually going lateral and they're staying at the first 6 inch to foot of soil because they want some aerobic conditions, but they're getting both. They're getting anaerobic, they're getting facultative anaerobes. So if you look at that soil that's on that top part, yes, it has air reaching up into like 12 inches, but we're not turning the soil all the time and pumping air into it.
I get what you're saying, because there's like a school of thought that says that we're constantly needing to do these things to have good soil.
Beneficial microbes.
But really what we're saying is nature, like a no-till method. You're not incorporating, you're not putting holes in the
pumping
soil
in air
and aerating it. Like naturally, these microorganisms can go from an anaerobic condition and they can bounce back if oxygen is being incorporated to it through just like water and storms and
cycles,
settling and cycles.
Yes, nature
and nature,
right? And so it's facultative anaerobes. It's fermentation, it's EM, it's Korean natural farming, it's nature, it's mimicking nature. And that's what we're looking at now. And that's what's in these biological solutions. And
I feel like this is allowing me to feel even more confident that I can be even more of a lazy farmer.
Yeah, we're permaculturists.
Because
we're
we
lazy.
don't have to constantly put these things in there. As long as we have an understanding of how nature works, we can kind of let them go and realize, by doing this action, we could be disrupting the soil more.
Correct.
Having to put in inputs, of the synthetic variety, which is mostly our go-to. And what we're trying to do with this knowledge and education is to help farmers, because right now the cost of fertilizers are going up more than ever. And our soil is being depleted now at a faster rate than ever. And we can begin to reinvigorate already depleted soils to bring them back to a living organism, because they are dead and they're constantly having to be fed. So,
and I'd like to point out also the recent understanding through David Johnson and his wife, Sue, the Johnson-Su bioreactor. We're now collectively understanding more that we really don't want to be disturbing and turning our compost all the time and heating it up all the time, because we're missing out on that more developed, diverse biology that can only be formed in a more natural state, which is not like a constant aerating. Now there is aeration because it has to be 12 inches. It can't be deeper than 12 inches with a Johnson-Su, but that's mimicking nature.
Wow.
So I have to give credit to us having a bit more understanding collectively with the Johnson-Su bioreactors in our composting world.
I need to learn more about.
And this is what I did my demonstration on at the Permaculture Convergence, was about the Johnson-Su. And it's really about understanding how to cultivate a more sophisticated biology of fungi, which if we're not incorporating the fungi into our food growing systems, we're really missing out on that diversified system that's bringing us to those higher levels. Right. And so with the Johnson-Su, and we won't go too deep on that system today, but that's really having a deeper understanding of how nature is cultivating these more later succession fungi organisms, which is happening through moisture. It's happening through aerobic conditions, meaning not more than 12 inches away from air. Like we don't want to go completely anaerobic, but it's not about aerobic or turn it, heat it, turn it. Because if we heat and turn, which can be appropriate on some situations when we're handling mass amounts of food waste. My background is composting for large organizations. And sometimes when you're tasked with handling large scale food waste, it will be heating and turning and processing and moving on and then letting it sit. And then letting it develop and age and go through more of a Johnson-Su kind of cycle.
Oh, I love that. I would love to learn more about that. Yeah. Further with that. And,
so we're progressing on our understanding with composting and biology and mimicking nature.
That's why I'm very passionate about what's happening with this story unfolding for me and my story with Moringa. It's becoming even more of like a mission, because I just wanted to do something that was good. And I'm trying to figure out, I've been trying to figure out what's that good thing for nature, for people that I really back and I really have a passion about. And I latched onto Moringa about 10 years ago because I heard about it from Dr. Sebi and him saying that it was super, like a superfood, right? And I was going through some issues with my own gut biome and my own issues with IBS and needing to incorporate more fiber in my diet. And so that's when I started my Moringa journey. And then learning permaculture and chop and drop and beginning to learn more about soil as this is really unfolding now. To see this is full circle for me. I'm getting chills just starting to really connect these dots with soil, Moringa, being able to take this miracle plant and essentially incorporate it into more farms. I've been, over the last couple of years, trying to tell as many farmers as possible that if they have 5 to 10 acres, to at least maybe make a border of Moringa, or if they have an extra row or a plot that they can incorporate Moringa in, it can be used to help bring these microorganisms into their soil, into their compost, either as a chop and drop or even just as a place to create soil, like a compost. Because I like to chop, put the Moringa leaves in a pile, not necessarily like a pile, but put it in an area that's breaking down with other things like mulch and grasses and other things like veggies and a compost, and help to reincorporate that back into my system on my raised garden beds to grow lettuce and other things like that. And I've been seeing like massive results. Now here I am 2 years into my farm, my Moringa farm, and now bringing in other plants. I'm having a lot more success with my other plants because Moringa is already in the system.
Got it. And we can talk briefly about biodiversity and regeneration. So, did you want me to switch out of the microscope?
Yeah. Is there anything else that we need to see here? With,
I mean, for this biofertilizer, this is pretty much it here.
Wow.
It would be much more complex in a soil sample.
Can you even show us the phosphorus?
Yeah. So I have an epifluorescence on this, so we can switch over to that. And because of the fluorescence of the phosphate, we're able with this microscope to see the phosphorus. Now, we can't see the other macro and micronutrients. They are there, but it's just the fluorescence that's giving us capability with the epifluorescence. So I'll switch that over now.
Wow. Look, I'm looking at these things. Like, where are they going? Where are all these things going? Like, they're going in a direction. Is it magnetic? Is it like, what's the flow? Like, how are they flowing? Is it possibly just because the Petri is a little bit angled, maybe not on a
well, and every slide, it's always having that sort of swoosh with the liquid. And as the slide dries, it'll, dry up in itself and change positions. So in general, when you put liquid on a slide, it has this sort of motion. And so right now I switched over to epifluorescence on this microscope. And let me put another. What we're seeing, if you see that yellow glow, that is the phosphorus from the Moringa.
Wow.
And I'll move a little bit around.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can see a lot there.
Yeah.
Phosphorus. This is when we talk about fertilizers, people hear NPK.
Yes.
That's nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium.
Correct. The macronutrients.
The macronutrients that are in fertilizers are already found in Moringa, and that's why we want to reincorporate it back into our food systems as a soil amendment.
Correct. So it has the NPK, but it also has the micronutrients as well, which is what the chemical fertilizers don't have. And so these microorganisms are able to get those micronutrients and give it to our plants. So this is a level that we could not get with synthetic. So micronutrients being boron, iron, manganese, molybdenum, zinc, copper, chlorine. And these micronutrients, even though they're micro and they're small, they actually play a really big role in the nutrition of our plants. In fact, maybe even more so, but it's really everything together holistically. But these are micronutrients that are able to obtain through these microorganisms is what's also giving us this higher level of health. So these kind of biological solutions have the macro, the NPK, and then micro, and then so much more.
Wow. Wow. You are really, really bringing this to life. I'm really getting a really great education here with your help. And this is beautiful science at work. We can see it firsthand. It is everything that we say it is. And it's just unbelievable.
Turn back on bright field. You see those glowing dots?
Yeah.
That's the
matter.
Minerals there.
Yep.
So we're back to bright field.
Beautiful.
So yeah, I'll switch over and then just briefly talk about regenerative growing and biodiversity. And then that also brings us into the importance and the power of inoculating our seeds with biological solutions as well.
Beautiful. Let's do that.
So when we in regenerative growing, it's really driven by biodiversity. It's driven by a few things, but biodiversity is essential. And it's because when we have a biodiversity of plants, we get a biodiversity of organisms. Mm-hmm. In fact, that's how we get a biodiversity of organisms. It's through a biodiversity of plants.
And not through a monocropping.
No.
Because when we crop one thing, it's, say, pulling a lot of one thing out of the soil. And then we're really depleting that one thing. If we just have fields and fields and fields of one thing, then it's really just taking out a lot of, say, like that one thing that plant really kind of pulls up from the soil. But this biodiversity, plants are putting in, some are taking out, and it's much more of a
robust,
robust system.
And so when we have diversity in plants, let's say that Moringa, and it's giving us nutrients and phytohormones and microorganisms that we wouldn't get from other plants. I really like the work of Christine Jones. She's a soil ecologist out of Australia. Mm-hmm. And she teaches us about quorum sensing. Mm. And so if you want to learn more about this, it's plenty of resources online with Christine Jones. And she teaches us that through a biodiversity of plants, we get a biodiversity of microorganisms, which leads us to quorum sensing. And what quorum sensing is you need a certain amount of microorganisms diversified, and they're in the ecosystem. And what they do is they're putting out sensors, biochemical signaling called autoinducers, because they can't see, they can't smell like who's who. So they're putting out these biochemical signaling, and they're detecting who's who and who's around them. Mm-hmm. Once they sense that they have enough of a certain type and they're all together, they'll come together, and that is how gene regulation is performed. So if they have enough diversity and enough of each other, they come together, and that's when they can turn on and off genes for different stressors in the environment, drought, flood, turning on and off genes for nutrient density. And so when we're looking for robust ecosystems and robust plants and being able to go through stressful situations, frost, drought, flood, they're able to do this through quorum sensing, which is done through biodiversity of the microorganisms.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's like that's almost like I'm thinking of swarm mentality, where once you get enough.
Correct.
Enough of,
then you
say,
can do
the
something.
Same insect.
Yeah.
They're almost all thinking in the same, all without really communicating. It's very much similar to that.
Yeah. And that's how they can turn on and off genes. So gene regulation through quorum sensing, through biodiversity of organisms that come through a biodiversity of plants.
Wow. You're really dropping a lot of really great names.
Yeah.
You're dropping lots of really great, just unbelievable, like soil processes and everything. I'm really loving
this is all coming from our greats in our soil science world that I obsessively absorb. And then so also wanted to talk about seed inoculation, which absolutely. Also Christine Jones speaks a lot about as well. Yeah.
Before you do that, I was thinking of what's the civil scientists?
Oh, citizen science.
Citizen scientists.
Yeah.
That's what you're a part of, right?
That's what this is. Yeah. So there's a movement happening called citizen science. And it's really it's happening because we're at a level of technology where these things are available now to us. Epifluorescence is available to us now at these prices that are affordable. And then also the information is being spread more by people like we're doing right now. And I got this information from other people. And so because of these two things going together, of this, the sharing of information and how we can access technology now, and even getting into DNA sequencing and barcoding now we can do at home, that is the movement of citizen science. And what citizen science is doing is bringing transparency to the science.
Well, who gave you the credentials to be able to talk about science the way that you do? I mean, seriously, this is what citizen scientists is all about, is being able to just put the information out and not have to be stuck behind these barriers of, say, like, other
intentions, other motives, other frameworks of organizations for whatever their motives are.
Yeah, because some organizations will stop the publication of things because it's going through their laboratory or whatever. And they're discovering these things, but sometimes it's it's not in the best interest of society or whatever to get that information out, because then it's really open source. And that's what really what this is
That's
an open source way of getting this out there.
So we're now moving into a space where transparency will be at its all-time high, because we can get the information and now understand and confirm it or not. Mm-hmm. So in the soil world, I can take your compost and look at it, and I have an understanding of things. So that cloud, or that not accessible to verify, is going away, which is pushing us forward as a society in a really positive way.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. And what was the other thing that you were going to mention?
I wanted to talk really quick about inoculating seeds.
Yes.
With biological solutions as well.
Exactly. Because that's one of the big things that we want to teach about using this biostimulant, is being able to inoculate. And so we have a series of things to go from seed to plant. You know, there's a preconditioning that we can do with our seeds, and that's called inoculating.
Yeah. And so I'm a big proponent of inoculating seeds. And this is also some information from Christine Jones, but even in permaculture, we've been inoculating seeds for a very long time. We just may not have fully understood why.
Yeah.
But I'm a big proponent of inoculating seeds, and the science behind that is, so we have our seed, and in the seed actually has a core microbiome as well. We've been talking a lot about microbiomes. And so the seed has a core microbiome. Mm-hmm. And when we wake up that seed out of dormancy, germination, what happens is the radical emerges from the seed. It's waking up. The root, the radical emerges. The radical comes out, and it's actually doing a sensor of where did they wake up at? What's the environment? What's going on? You know, what year is it? Just kidding. And if we inoculate the seeds, and when we say inoculate the seeds, we're talking about soaking your seeds and adding some kind of biological solution. It can be like this fertilizer. It can be worm castings. It can be KNF inputs. It can be all kinds of things, but we're looking for a microbial rich inoculant in that water while we soak our seeds.
Soaking the seeds in
good water.
In really good water. So
really good water.
Dechlorinated water, rain
best water. Yeah.
Minerals, vitamins, the things that the water needs. And then soaking seeds in this biological solution with really good water. And then
adding in microorganisms to that water. And you soak those seeds basically overnight. Smaller seeds you can soak for a few hours. Larger seeds you can soak for longer.
Yeah.
But you soak your seeds.
Depending on the thickness of the shell.
The seed coat, yes.
Yeah, the seed coat.
And the size of the seed.
Yeah.
And so when the radical emerges, the root, it's sensing like, where am I? What kind of environment am I? So this inoculating your seeds as it's waking up with that radical is actually a hack.
Oh,
and
yes.
It's saying when it comes out and it's surrounded by this inoculant, it says, OMG, we are in a microbial rich environment, guys.
Yep.
Pump out the exudates.
Boom.
There's so many microbes here. We got to exudate. I need you, seed, to start pumping. So it starts its life out at that germination stage when it's living off that cotyledon inside the seed, and it's starting to pump those exudates out into the soil that you have it. Those exudates are now calling in the more microorganisms. So it just keeps growing. And what that is doing is creating its rhizosphere around the roots. So at the roots of the plant, there's what we call the rhizosphere. And in that rhizosphere is where everything's happening.
Oh, yeah.
That is the magic of the plant. That is the brain of the plant. That's where everything's functioning.
It's getting its heart really pumping.
Everything's really going there.
Boom. Yeah.
Biophysics are happening there. Everything's happening there. So if we promote it to shoot out more exudates, calling in more microorganisms, creating more of a rhizosphere, that's when you lift out your root or your seedling. And if you ever see your roots just stuck with with soils and glues, and the roots are all covered with aggregates of soil. It's not just you pull it out and it's white and nothing's sticking to it and you see the bare root. If you gently took out your roots and it was holding on to beautiful soil exudates, that's telling you that rhizosphere around that root is fully pumping. Biophysics are at its peak, and everything we need it to do is happening with the microorganisms, the exudates, the aggregates, and everything's happening. So we can hack and jumpstart that whole process by inoculating our seeds.
I love that, because I've noticed as a Moringa farmer that when I inoculate Moringa seeds with the biostimulant, I'm cutting the germination rate in half, because I'll go sometimes 10 to 14 days without inoculating to get a germination, right? 14 days. Yeah. And if I soak all of my Moringa seeds in the biostimulant overnight, I can get it in 4 to 6 days. Yeah. I can get a shoot within 4 to 6 days.
So this is what you should try for funsies, is do one inoculated, do one without, and then gently after, 14 days or so, it's done eating off the cotyledon, gently excavate your Moringa and look at the roots with the rhizosphere.
And even start doing that with all other plants too.
Yeah.
As a testament.
That's how it's taught, is gently excavate your root. And if it's covered, the rhizosphere is covered in those aggregates, you have some really healthy plants growing. And if you pull it out and it's just bare and white, it's not very active right there in that rhizosphere. Yeah.
You know what I'm doing is I'm taking Moringa powder, I'm conditioning and pre-gaming the soil essentially. And I'm putting that in my raised beds, and then I'm activating that with the liquid extract. Yes. And I'm getting like full heads of kale and lettuce, and even starting to grow flowers on my garden beds within 30 days. It's only been, and now we're going into 45 days since we essentially started our garden, but we've already been eating from it for at least the last 2 weeks.
So if we take this a step deeper into the Johnson Su composting system, and we haven't talked deep about it, it is actually the application of the compost that is crucial. And Dr. David Johnson is teaching us that it has to be applied as an inoculant to the seed, or it has to be applied with the seed in the furrow when planting. So it's more than just cultivating microbial fungi rich compost, but also super essential for the Johnson Su is how are you applying it? Not that it won't benefit as a top dress or how we usually apply compost, but the key is exactly what we're talking about. It's inoculating that seed as it germinates.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I have this microgreens kit where I take just regular black soil. It's a good base. It's a base, but it's essentially dead. Yeah. It's been pasteurized.
You don't need all that for sprouts and microgreens. You don't need rich. Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm trying to enrich it. And so what I've been doing is putting that powder, the Moringa powder, in it, and then inoculating it with the extract, and then putting the seeds in that. And
with
like
the seeds.
With the seed in this microgreens tray. I feel like that's really like inoculating it. And then after about 30 to 60 days, I've got big enough trees that I can pull out of that tray, that little tray, and I can get into bigger pots, or I can go to the ground.
That's when you want to focus on your soil after it's eaten the cotyledon. That's when the soil is super important. And then when you're in your sprouting and microgreen phase, that's when you want to focus on that inoculation of the seed. Yeah. Oh, but once you transplant after that cotyledon is eaten up, that's when we really want to feed more the soil. Yes. Yeah.
I like to mix. I'm starting to really mix the powder into the soil and just already have that as in there for the vitamins, the minerals, the conditioning.
And that's the food for the microbes.
Exactly. Yeah. It's food for those microbes.
Organic matter, minerals.
Boom. This was a full all around, like very, very educational time with you. I really had a really, really great time being able to learn. I'm going to continue this conversation. This is essentially now my main lane. I'm literally trying to get into soil, how to start regenerative farms, and really make that a practice in my business and really focusing on that, because everybody already kind of knows about Moringa as a people food and possibly learning about it as an animal food. But for my business, I'm really, really wanting to get more into the plant food aspect of Moringa and the power of it.
Yep, definitely. And if you are in the Florida area or pass through, definitely. And if not, regardless, go to ChoZen's website.
Yes.
And sign up for the email. You don't get a lot of emails. We just literally send out information for when we're doing our programming, which we are really focused on building community. And so we do every Friday, we do a volunteer day in the garden. I'm there always talking and teaching. You really can't stop me from always talking about this stuff. And then once a month, we do a lunch and learn. Where you can buy a ticket just for the lunch and learn. And that's when we do a farm to table lunch and also do a 45-minute lecture based on regenerative ag or health and wellness. And we're actually going to have you, Kendrick, out for a guest speaker.
Yes.
So stay tuned. Sign up for the email notifications under ChoZen.com, ChoZen Retreat. And then that's CHOZEN, like Zen, ChoZen.
I love it.
And so just sign up for our email and keep up to date with what we're doing, because we're really, really cultivating regenerative community. And so, volunteer days and lunch and learns, and we're going to have Kendrick out there and just stay up to date with us.
Absolutely. What's the website again?
I believe it's ChoZen Retreat, or Google ChoZen Retreat, and that's CHOZEN, ChoZen, like your Zen.
It is ChoZenRetreat.com.
Okay. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thanks, Moti. I really had a great time here with you today. We're going to be I'm going to put this information in the description. Everybody go to ChoZenRetreat.com. Get on the mailing list. You'll be able to see when I'm going to be there. You can also volunteer and begin to create community near the Sebastian area. Yeah. And they have a lot of really great programs there, educational people. It's
community, education. That's what it's all about right now. If we're really putting into action this paradigm shift of regeneration, it's really going to take us coming together as community in action with education. Yeah. So. You guys have a really, really great Instagram page. What's the Instagram handle that we can find on Instagram? Oh, it's Live ChoZen. Live ChoZen? I believe it's L-I-V. L-I-V. Let me check. Live ChoZen. Okay, we'll also put that in the description. Oh, sorry. L-I-V-E. ChoZen. ChoZen. Live ChoZen. On Instagram. We have a really big group of amazing, talented people coming together to make everything you see, the Instagram, our marketing team, a lot of people coming together to give you what you see. Yeah. It's a beautiful, beautiful page. And yours as well. Where can we find you? Oh, yeah. And so I have my own Instagram page and I document for fun. I documented back in 2013, the Korean natural farming for just to put it out there. So mine is just, I try to get things out there to document, and my artist background, I like to get creative sometimes, but my Instagram is exactly the same blog I created in 2013 for the Korean natural farming inputs. And that's Confessions from the Soil. And now you know where it came from. Beautiful. I love it. Yeah, just a fun page for me. Well, everybody go follow Moti at Confessions from the Soil. Yep. On Instagram. And we'll have all that information down there. Perfect. I look forward to seeing you very soon. Yeah, we'll see you out here in ChoZen soon for our lunch and learns. Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for coming to the show today and having a wonderful episode. And we will see you very soon, Moti. Thank you for having me. It's been a blast. My pleasure.